Hello everyone, Hyper here, and I know it's been a while since I posted a video, but I kind of took some time away from WoW and from gaming to focus on other things and just to relax and reset a little bit before the new patch and the new tier comes out. So in my time away, I kind of picked up another hobby, and while practicing this hobby/sport, I realized that it's very similar to gaming in the way that you practice it. And today's video will be mainly focused on how to practice and how to become better at something through this type of practice. And this is something I call systematic improvement, but I'm sure there's tons of other names for it or some better term. This is just what I like to call it. And this applies pretty much to every competitive discipline that you can think of that requires practice to be good at. This new hobby that I picked up is very similar to WoW in that it requires a lot of different things to happen at the same time for you to be considered good at it. So you need to practice all of them, but they can be broken down into individual components. And this is something that I think new players struggle with when watching my videos or, just watching kill videos from someone else, is that they try to practice everything at the same time, and it's just extremely overwhelming. So first of all, I will obviously use the example of WoW raiding, but this can be applied to any competitive discipline. To be a top level raider, you basically need a perfect damage rotation. And I put rotation there in quotes because obviously rotations aren't a thing anymore, but you need to be able to execute your class to the highest level to do the most damage. Second thing is good situational awareness and positioning. Third thing would be the ability to quickly make decisions on the spot. Fourth thing is keep track of important timers. And fifth is consistency. So we've already taken just the idea of being a good raider and kind of broke it down into subcategories that we can then try to improve at individually. So contrary to what we believe, humans are pretty bad at multitasking. It's kind of a recent thing that we've developed as people, and some people are better at it than others. But if you think you're great at multitasking, just, try a basic experiment and you will probably find out that you're not actually that great at it, which is what happened to me. So how do we excel at something that essentially rewards multitasking if you feel like you're not that great at it? If you look at raiding, you have to do all of these things at the same time. You have to do your damage rotation. You still have to press defensive cooldowns to help out your healers. You need to be able to position correctly. You need to be able to predict timers, keep track of things. And that's a lot of information to digest and kind of make decisions based upon. The first and most important thing is that there are some things which you need to make into a second nature and build good habits. And this requires breaking down a complex action such as raiding into its base components and practicing the components one at a time. And I noticed this, especially mid to low level raiders, typically they are pretty good at damage. Damage wise, they don't really struggle that much. But once you toss a bunch of mechanics on top of them, they completely fall apart. Their damage falls off. They also struggle with mechanics because they're trying to do multiple things at the same time and not really doing any of them well. So how do we go about improving this system and improving as players? First of all, like I said, is that you need to practice each step individually until it's basically a habit or second nature. It is crucial to do this in kind of a continuous fashion and keep building upon things that you already feel very comfortable with, rather than trying to practice everything at once. And the reason why this is important is that if something is already second nature, or a habit, so you don't really have to think about doing it, then you can add on top of it more things until you build into this complex action. So I will use again raiding as an example. The first thing we will want to practice is our rotation. And this is probably the easiest aspect to practice because you can either go into boss fights, easy boss fights where you don't need to focus on mechanics such as a heroic raid, and just focus on your damage. And even within just focusing on your damage, there are things that you can practice individually. As a Frost DK, I can practice not wasting runes or runic power within my Breath of Sindragosa. Or I can practice having perfect usage of my Cold Heart within Pillar of Frost. or I can practice perfect cooldown management. So there are all of these things that I can practice, and it's important to practice them one at a time. What I suggest doing is going to a training dummy. And I noticed this early in the expansion when everything got changed, talents got changed, classes got changed. The second nature and the habits that I built in Legion were no longer practical and were no longer relevant. So I needed to kind of rebuild that background knowledge so my brain can essentially make unconscious decisions about my rotation, which then allows me to pay attention to other things. So I would go to a target dummy and just hit it for 2 minutes and just focus on one specific thing. Okay, this time I will focus on just getting perfect usage out of my Pillar of Frost and Cold Heart, or perfect usage out of my Breath of Sindragosa. And if you do these repetitively and you do them for enough time, they will be a second nature and you won't have to actually think about them at all while you're raiding. Which, like I said before, it frees up your conscious decision making to focus on other things that are also important. So the second thing here is situational awareness and positioning. This one is a little trickier to practice because you can only do it in raids, really. And what I suggest to players is that whenever you get to a new boss, a lot of people ask me, how do I do damage on this boss? When do I press my cooldowns? How do I line up my cooldowns? What is the best way of doing this fight? And I often tell them, just a general outline, but then I force the point that the first thing that you should figure out on any new fight that you're unfamiliar with is positioning. Once you know positioning, everything else can be built on top of it. So the first few pulls, let's say if it's a 100 pull boss, the first 10 pulls, 15 pulls, whatever, you should solely focus on positioning. Where do I stand in comparison to others? Be aware of how your raid is spread out, and this will really help you out with mechanics. So you can see that each step you practice, you can build on top of it. That will in turn help you with other things that you need to do on a fight. So then the third thing is the ability to make decisions quickly. And this is something that certain people are great at while others struggle with, but like everything else, it is a skill that can be improved upon. If you struggle with decision making on the spot, such as where to run with a debuff, so you get a debuff and you kind of panic, I don't know which way to run, you start running one direction, you stop, you turn around, and this happens way more than you think it does. If you're someone who can deal with this and doesn't apply to you, then don't worry about it. But if you struggle with this, then there's a very easy way to remedy this. For example, on Zekvoz, if I know that I-beams are about to happen, then I make a decision and a plan before it even happens. So I know that I-beams will happen in the next 5 seconds. So I take a quick peek around the room and see where people are kind of spread out. So I know that if I get the I-beam, I already have a plan on where to move. And that will reduce the amount of time that you need to react, because instead of realizing that you have the I-beam, having to make a decision on where to move, and then executing that move, you simply just need to realize that you have I-beam and then make the move. So you essentially eliminate a whole step, which saves you a crucial amount of time on mechanics that happen very quickly. So if you have a plan for essentially every worst case situation or worst case scenario, then you will never be caught off guard. So you essentially eliminate the need to have to make decisions quickly. Certain things obviously will still happen, such as taking huge amounts of damage and having to react with defensive cooldowns. But that again is another thing where being proactive is much better than being reactive. So if I know that there's a spot in the fight where I typically dip to pretty low HP, rather than reacting to that, I know that I should probably use a defensive right before it happens. That way I mitigate way more damage. So having a plan for the worst case scenario every single time will kind of eliminate the need for you to make decisions very quickly. And these plans, you will notice that they will quickly be incorporated into your normal gameplay. So now, for example, when I get to Zekvoz, I don't need to consciously think about, if I get I-beam, I move here. if I see the I-beam timer, I automatically look around the room. And I know that once I get the I-beam, I know where to move. And if I don't get the I-beam, then I just go on DPSing the boss. But you can see how all of these things, once you practice them enough and you practice them individually, then they really become second nature and a good habit. And just like good habits, you can build bad habits very quickly, which is also important to avoid. But moving on to the last point, which is consistency. The great thing about practicing each part of the system individually is that you develop consistency in kind of a passive fashion. And what I mean by that is that if you've made something a subconscious decision, so you've practiced it so much that it becomes subconscious, you will be very consistent at it because you won't have the added error of having to make decisions consciously, which can include some errors. So for example, if I am not that great at my rotation and I try to do everything at the same time, I will probably mess something up. I will either mess up my rotation because I need to divert some part of my focus to being able to press my buttons and do my rotation. But at the same time, there's other things happening. There's timers, mechanics, debuffs, strategies, movements. And I simply can't pay attention to all those things at the same exact time. So really being able to make something a subconscious decision-making process and build upon that frees up so much of your decision-making that it's absolutely incredible. So overall, and kind of recapping this whole theory and my philosophy on practicing, practice each step separately. And that is ultimately the crucial point. Once you feel like you mastered one step, you can move on to the next. Never try to practice all of the steps at the same exact time. And this will guarantee make you a better player, or if you're applying this to something else, better at that particular discipline. If you have any questions about this or, the game or whatever in particular, just leave it in the comment section below. I really hope you enjoyed this video. It was a little more of a philosophical video rather than actual gameplay, but I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, please hit the like button and sub to the channel. I'll see you on the next one.